The market for top-quality kids' books has mushroomed in the past decade. We chose 4 successful writer-illustrators to discuss their art and inspiration in this highly specialized field. It's curious how clearly their artwork illuminates their own character.
My name is Robin Muller. I am an author-illustrator of children's books, Canadian children's books.
My name is Phoebe Gilman, and I'm a writer and an illustrator of children's books.
My name is Maryann Kovalski, and I write and illustrate children's picture books.
My name is Ian Wallace, and most of my formative years were spent in Niagara Falls. 3 years I lived in Toronto, but I really count myself a product of Niagara Falls. My parents were fabulous storytellers, as were my grandparents, and for me the oral tradition was a very important part of my life, and I think what turned me on to the love of story were those stories, and in fact my favorite stories were the ones that for me were real. They were stories of childhood memories of my parents and my grandparents, and certainly their childhoods were quite different from mine.
When I was growing up, my mother was a great reader, and we got our library cards by the time that we were old enough just to print our names. But I don't remember children's books figuring very strongly in my childhood. I read a lot of comic books. That's the closest I came to children's books. I just remember graduating to adult literature very, very early on.
My brother was very interested in art, and as a child I would pore over these elaborate illustrations, or paintings, not illustrations, excuse me, paintings by the Pre-Raphaelites or by the Renaissance artists. And because I couldn't understand what was actually going on, or if I could manage to read the captions, I couldn't make sense of what they were talking about being the Eve of St. Agnes or some obscure reference to Ophelia. So what I would do is I would then create my own narrative.
I didn't have picture books, but my mother used to read to me from Walter Winchell's column. She was, I can still see her red lips and that unfiltered cigarette hanging from her lips. And I'd ask her to tell me what Winchell says today. And she'd hunch over and she'd tell me about Ricky and Desi and Lucy and everyone.
I was quite successful in fine art, as success goes in that field. I always had exhibitions. I had no trouble getting a gallery to show my work. I managed to eke out a spare living that way. But I never liked that whole scene. It wasn't fun for me. And I used to do my balloon tree book. I had the idea for that story years and years and years before it ever became a book. And I used to play with it for recreation. I'd pull it out when I got frustrated with my other work.
In trying to find books for children, books for girls in particular, I was appalled at the female characters in children's books because they're all such dorks. Well, I mean, you know, when you have this story of this girl, this pretty girl, learns that her stepmother's out to get her, runs away, makes it into a forest, lives with 7 little men. Little men say to her, "Look, it's Snow White, the queen's out to get you, the witch is out to get you. When we're not here, don't answer that door." She says, "Yes, yes, yes." They go off to work. Snow White's left alone. As soon as they're gone, there's a at the door. What does she do? She opens the door. Witch comes in, puts a poison comb in her hair, and bang, Snow White's down for the count. Little men come home, they wake her up, and they say, "Look at Whitey, when we're not here, don't answer that door." And she says, "Yes, yes, yes." As soon as they're gone, there's a at the door. And what does Snow White do? She opens the window. We need some stories with really good, strong heroines in them. So this is what I did. I started penning a book about a good, strong, resourceful little girl who can handle any situation using her head instead of brawn.
I spent 5 years at the Ontario College of Art. What I was taught and what I discovered was to think. And nobody had ever asked me to think before.
Be an artist, although there was a real crisis when I was a kid, because when I was very little, because although I didn't know if I wanted to be a nun or an artist, and I thought if I was an artist and a nun, I would have to wear a beret on top of the habit, which would ruin the look, you know.
I never know what is going to start a new book. Something from nothing, my brand new book, it was just a chance remark that another author, Janet Lund, made to me at a conference we were at. The story is based on a traditional Jewish folktale. I'm going to set it back in the shtetls. That's where my own grandparents come from. So it took on another dimension for me. In doing the research, I was quite moved by the people and the villages and the settings, and I felt that I had to, in a sense, become a witness for this world which had vanished, which was destroyed in the Holocaust.
Well, my last book, The Nightwood, took me 2 years to complete, and it was a real bloodletting process. It was very difficult. And I thought that I needed to take a break from it for a while, just to go back, re-examine where I came from, and maybe choose a different road altogether. Maybe leave this behind and move towards animation. Maybe this is the next natural step in the process, is to move from pictures without a narrative to pictures with a narrative to pictures with a narrative that now move.
I don't think it's good to second-guess your audience. And to almost sort of, if that works, that doesn't work. I mean, I think that's what a publisher's for. They'll say, no, we did a book on hippos who divorce, and it fell totally flat. No more hippos who divorce. But you need to expose in your soul your need to write and to illustrate hippos divorcing.
And so with one simple situation, you then begin to build character. You find the character that will allow the reader to move into the story and experience a situation that this kid is a part of.
First of all, I try to identify something that I think is important or something that's going to move me. With the magic paintbrush, the one point that I found to be really important was something the old man said. As long as he saw with his eyes, the paintbrush would help him. But one day he would learn to see with his heart, and then he would no longer have need of it. So the purpose of the story was to actually make that leap beyond the surface image, to look within, to see what you can do, to realize that magic does not help you, that you have to act with your heart to get anything solved.
I will rewrite a manuscript sometimes 50, 100 times to get it right, just to get each sentence exactly the way that I want it. Sometimes a book will go on for 4 years, like in that writing stage, the way that Grandma and the Pirates did. That went through so many different rewrites and metamorphoses. I've got a big, thick envelope of manuscripts from that, and it finally turned into something totally different than where it started out. It was originally Grandma's Chocolate Chicken, and there isn't even a chicken left in it, no less a chocolate chicken. So I cut and paste. A picture book has to fit into 32 pages, and that's minus the front matter. So I want to see, do I have an action per page, or do I have too much happening? Does it fit into this format? And then I have to edit it out if it doesn't.
I keep a journal absolutely every day. I'm really religious about that, and I think somehow stories can come out of that. When you write stories, you don't write to deadline, at least I don't. It's a very speculative venture. You write the story, present it to the publisher. If they like it, they publish it.
This book is called The Year of Fire. It's about a fire. It's about the biggest fire grandfather ever saw. A fire so big that he says to his granddaughter, "You won't believe it." And she promises to believe him. And so he closes his eyes, because when he closes his eyes, he can see himself when he was a little boy growing up on that farm. And the fire literally lasts for an entire year. When the people who fight the fire go home exhausted, believing the fire is out, they sleep contentedly all winter, but that fire isn't out at all. It's gone underground, and it has become a peat fire, and it has moved across the valley, and it ate up the roots of every single tree that remained standing. And in the springtime, when the earth warmed and the snows melted, those remaining trees just fell over. 10,000 of them plopped into the snow.
With something from nothing, I decided I would do it, but from another angle. I decided I would make the tailor into a grandfather. And so once I did that, a lot of changes sort of spilled off that, and it developed into a story that was as much about the whole family relationships as it was about a story being made. And in the end, the grandfather makes all these things for his grandson, but he starts out by making a blanket for the little boy. And when the blanket gets old and ratty, the way they do, and the little boy doesn't want to throw it out, and his mother wants him to, and he asks the grandfather to fix it. And the little boy grows up, and by the time that the button is lost, the little boy is old enough to sit down and write the story himself. At that point, I said, I think I'm going to put a little scene down below the floorboards. I'm going to make a family of mice move in, and of course then they can be the ones who find the button. As the grandfather cuts and snips up the wonderful blanket, all these little bits and pieces fall down between the floorboards, and the mice find them. And as the story progresses, the mouse house becomes more and more filled with things made from the wonderful material.
Because the last two stories were so dark, I needed a break, I needed a holiday. And this book is just a happy, bright, colorful little song book. And what I've done is I've taken the song Row, Row Your Boat, which only has that one verse, Row, Row Your Boat, gently down the stream, merrily, 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 life is but a dream. And I've built a story around it in which a badger, which is an underground creature, decides to leave his underground world and become a sailor and sail off and live a happy, free life. Well, of course, as he goes along singing this song, other animals also take to the idea, and they join him until the boat becomes so full that the poor badger is pushed off, swims to shore, waves them goodbye, and decides that a sailor's life knows too much strife, a train's the thing for me. So then he becomes a train conductor.
I wanted to write a love story about, in a 40s tradition. Brenda and Edward's story of two happy dogs who lived behind a French restaurant in happy bliss, and they got separated through an accident and never got together again until their very old age. But right before the end of the book, the worst thing happened to my character, that he was, not only did he lose the love of his life, but then he was fired. He was going to be replaced with a much younger dog. I was telling the children about this and about my using characters again. So I said, and this is the guy who fired Edward. And there was one little boy there, and he just said, no, no, no. I said, he's a nice guy. He's just an actor. You know, when he finishes being in my book, he'll mow his lawn and do whatever he has to do. He said, no, I can't get by this. This is the guy who fired Edward. I just can't get by that, sorry.
Now, this is a storyboard. The characters are all there, and I just start blocking out the storyboard just so I know the action. And what I start paying attention to while I'm doing this is, again, much like cinema, camera angles. So I needed this progression of him being aware of the ship, and then cut to this overall scene where he's aware that everyone is in a boat or a ship of some kind, and then just start building from that.
And we start here with little tiny thumbnail drawings. This is just one sheet of them. There were other sheets that came before and others that came after, but this is the one that I ultimately liked in terms of the design and the shape of the story as it flowed across each page and related to each page before and each page up.
The next stage of actually putting it into a little book, that's a dummy book. And then I'll actually be working closer to the actual size of the book itself, and I've scotch taped the manuscript, the typewritten manuscript, into place here. And then I can get a feel for the action of it as I turn the pages.
I use my characters almost like actors. You know, it's a very tedious business, this. You're in here all the time, all alone. A book can take 6 months, 9 months, so you need to do little things for yourself to make the time go by. And I have my cast of characters. I love film, and so I treat these as movies. And so this is my latest movie, and I can hire anyone I want, and I don't have to pay them.
Then the next step is to get the manuscript typeset. And because before I do the final artwork, I have to make sure, because of the design of the page, I have to make sure that the space for the type is exactly right. The village itself is actually based on this street over here. I've taken it and reversed it just for the sake of my composition. All the people in the street, the bagel vendor, the organ grinder, the old village pump, all the people in the street are actual portraits of these people that I did.
Once I got this basic sense of how the story could flow and a kind of patterning, then I began to draw rough drawings, large rough drawings of each of these double-page spreads, and then watched that journey and began to see more closely how the perspectives worked and how the design elements in each page related to the story, related to the characters, related to each of the images that appeared on that given two-page spread.
What I used to do after this was that I would then draw these pictures larger. And I used to find that I would lose a certain amount of the spontaneity. Every library now has a Xerox machine that enlarges. So I just now trot to the library with all these little sketches, smack them on the machine and blow them up. I then slip it underneath a piece of paper, underneath a piece of white paper so I can see it. And then literally I just color it in so that I get that. And here I'm just using basic pencil crayons, the cheapest kind you can get.
I especially like working on torn paper. I remember a very wise teacher telling us that in school, because you're faced with, this is pretty daunting. I mean, looking at this, I don't know. Does it terrify you as much as it terrifies me? It terrifies me, and it terrifies me more the more I do it. So it's good if I dirty up the paper and I spill a little coffee on it, and then I think nobody's going to see this, so who do you know, I'm not worried. I can just draw.
When it comes to the final artwork, all my other books, with the exception of Something from Nothing, are done in gouache, which is a watercolor medium, so they're done on watercolor paper. Something from Nothing, the drawings were of a nature that I felt needed a different medium. They're done in oil and egg tempera, which is the medium that I use in my paintings, and it's a more classical, traditional medium that was used for centuries.
I have a light box, but the way I used to work is blacken the whole back. Put it down on my good paper. Tape it down so it doesn't move around. And go over the whole thing. It'll come up like carbon paper on the good paper. And then I'll begin to add my color with washes, with whatever the technique calls for.
Because the story takes place around 1920, I felt that the look of it had to be one that was reminiscent of postcards that were hand-tinted around that period of time. I wanted the black and ink line to play a very heavy role in the illustrations, and so I allowed them to give shape and form and shadow to the landscape and to the characters. I then went over top of those lines with color, and I used those colors in color washes.
When I was about 12 years of age, I saw a film called Moulin Rouge with José Ferrer, and there's a scene in the film where the artist Toulouse-Lautrec, which is what the film is based on, is making the poster to Moulin Rouge, the famous poster, and he takes a toothbrush and he dips it in some lithographer's ink, and the lithographer scoffs at him and says, "Ho, ho, ho, Monsieur Lautrec, that will never work." But in any case, he takes the toothbrush and he drags his thumb over the top of it, and it splatters the lithographer's stone. Gets printed, looks great. I thought, oh, artists use toothbrushes. Ran up to the bathroom, grabbed my brother's toothbrush, dunked it in some ink, set to work.
I was going to the studio one day. This was when I didn't work at home. And I was driving to work with my husband, and he was in a really foul mood, and I was so annoyed. So I was about to approach this picture, and I did. I thought, I'll get you. I put him in this picture. I put 10 pounds on him. I put a hat on him, which he hates, and I made him shop. shopping bags in his. So forever, he's locked into this picture, shopping with a hat on. Jingle bells. It had to have brightness. A lot of night scenes. So I used strong blues. I used a lot of chalk and pencil in this. I listened to Gershwin constantly. I wanted to have that sort of old New York-y feel.
For the Year of Fire, I have used a man who is a wonderful friend, and he very kindly allowed me to steal his face, to steal his image. And he is the grandfather. So I had those images in my head, but I also had to be reminded frequently of what kinds of trees and how those trees were shaped and what texture their bark exhibited, and how the leaves formed on branches, how landscape rolls, what kind of colors are there in the winter, what is the quality of the snow.
So when I bring the final artwork in, I just almost feel like crying, and then it's in the publisher's hands, and at Scholastic, it's a wonderful feeling. When I brought in the artwork, everybody stopped what they were doing and came from all over the building to see, oh, the artwork's in for the new book. Come and see it. It's wonderful, and that is music to an author's ears to have it appreciated.
All the originals get gathered and they go to Hong Kong.
Hong Kong, yeah. This is the first set of proofs. There generally are 2 or 3, depending on the quality of the proofs.
Then we check it very, very carefully to make sure there are no mistakes, to make sure that the color is as close as we want it to be.
Then the publisher dummies it up, sends it off to Hong Kong where it's printed.
Most books are printed in the world. Most children's books are printed in the world. They're set up there, so to keep them at realistic prices.
That's it. It's a terrible thing, I hate to admit it. As soon as the book is off my desk, it's gone.
My income from my paintings was always very minimal, so I figured I wasn't sacrificing that much of an income that way, and my expectations were never that I'm going to become quite wealthy at doing this. It surprised me the success in terms of how many books have been sold, and that my income does keep rising each year. It's far outstripped what I ever earned as a painter.
I don't exist on my royalties. I can't. I don't think about that. Unlike some other people who perhaps sell better than I do. I'm here to do it because I want to do it, and I would do it regardless of whether I was selling the numbers of books I'm selling now or whether I'm not selling those numbers.
I made it my business to make a living. I didn't want it to be a hobby. I remember being horrified by that as being something that often when friends would, or when people who had serious careers had a baby and they wanted to take some time off, they'd say, well, now I want to do something really light, like, write and illustrate children's picture books. I didn't kill them. I'm definitely, I'm a Canadian. I've been here for 17 years. My children have been born here, and I'll die here. Canadian teachers and librarians and parents and kids are very loyal to their Canadians. They follow their Canadian authors, and they know a body of work. They treat your work as a body of work.
In 1973, in Canada, you could not find a book which had a Canadian setting as a locale. You could not find Canadian books which reflected the Canadian experience or the Canadian society, which was a multicultural one, a mosaic, not the melting pot that the United States is. I want to make sure that every child in this country has the right to see his or her face on a book. I want to be associated with people who produce those kind of books.
You have to, I think, in doing kids' books, pay equal attention to the light and dark side of childhood. When you're a child, there's always someone there who's going to beat you up. Parents fight. Life can be very uncertain. And with many people, they look at children's books, children's book illustrators, and think, oh, isn't that sweet? You know, oh, what a nice life. That's not what it's about. When you think of it, childhoods like Beatrix Potter had a terrible childhood. Hans Christian Andersen had a terrible childhood. And with many, as I said, of the children's authors and illustrators I speak to, they also had very bad childhoods. And it's kept them in touch with their childhoods because they've often had to think about it, or suddenly these incidents will reemerge in an adult situation and it throws you right back. So this has certainly been at the root of many of my stories, I think. It's a way of me working things out, sort of dealing with it, putting it in a picture. And it keeps me healthy, actually. It keeps me very healthy.
I think what is important in all of literature is that the main characters are universal, regardless of whether they're animal or human. The emotions that they feel, the experiences that they are a part of, are experiences and emotions that we can all tap into, and they're experiences that mark us as human.
I just like doing them. I love seeing them in many, many little hands.